So today we're going to look at something beyond just using software. We simply going to be talking about bridging the digital divide. The gap, this is the gap between simply having BIM tools and actually achieving the measurable outcomes, project outcomes. We're going to be using Santigate as a case study, and yeah, we'll take you through the entire roadmap. Okay, so that's just a little bit about me. If you want to connect by LinkedIn and subscribe to my YouTube channel, the link is up here, down here. So yeah, get straight into it. So for today's roadmap, we'll take you through the framework, the BIM maturity, and how to climb. I'm going to talk about Santigate Phase 2 as the project benchmark, and then after diving a little bit into the process, the digital backbone, and the life cycle value that it offers, and then lastly, just the outcome. So we'll start off with the framework. So what you just heard from Warwick is that basically we need to change our workflows. The old way, what we call is the analog delivery. This is kind of breaking the industry. It relies on the disconnected PDFs and emails that gets lost, which leads to constant rework and budgets. So what I want to show you is basically the other side. What is there to come? And Santigate, which is a 22,000 square meter project, which serves as a kind of a level 2, which I'll get through in a moment, workflow in the kind of real world. So the simple question is, how do we get there? So looking at the BIM maturity scale, the simple explanation is, think of BIM maturity almost like a way of people communicating. And for example, if we were to build a house together, so it's not just the tools that you use, it's about how teams communicate with one another through data. So the ladder is kind of explained in a sense. You get level 0, 1, 2, and 3. We'll start off with level 0, which is kind of like the paper age, unmanaged CADs. So imagine everyone having their own piece of paper. The architect draws a wall, the plumber draws a pipe, or the wet service engineer draws a pipe, the mechanical engineer draws a duct, but they never actually coordinate this information or overlay their pieces of paper. So you realize that the pipe is going through a window, then you are in a situation, and the outcomes of that is screaming and shouting and expensive mistakes. With level 2, which is the digital silos. So now everyone moves to the digitalization. Everyone uses computers, the architect has 3D model, the engineer has 3D model, and so forth. But they aren't shared the live information. So they might send each other PDFs, or can you export this floor plan to DWG and then send it through over email. But you realize that sometimes when there's a design change, that's not really communicated. Then it's like the outcome, oh, I thought you used this version from Tuesday. So with level 2, which is the federated bug, so call this a team huddle, or in rugby terms, the scrum. This is basically where Santigate kind of falls in. So instead of everyone working in isolation, all different 3D models such as structure, mechanical, wet service engineer are brought together into one. So federated model, just basically a fancy word of calling it the master model. So basically how it works is it's basically a digital rehearsal. Because everyone is working with their own models, we get to overlay the information in one common data environment, a CDE. And thereafter, as Warwick has mentioned about the clash detection process, where that's something that is automated and you pick up those information or issues before getting to site. And then lastly, level 3, which is the integrated BIM. This is kind of like the ultimate goal on every project. And like Jay mentioned earlier about speaking about digital twins. So they aren't, so it essentially there's no more separator of models. It's one single live cloud-based model that everyone gets to work at the same time. So essentially this is the future. When the building is finished, you kind of had to have to hand that over. Instead of your paper-based trail, you have a digital twin. So think about it, for example, if we had to have a digital twin of this building, the light fixture or the mechanical vet or the AC unit has particular code, manufacturer code on it. That information is put into a digital twin. So essentially, the win is total transparency from sketch to day one to when the building is demolished in that sense. So maturity isn't really about software. I remember when I started being in this BIM coordination space, I had a conversation with my colleague, wanting to understand like what is BIM coordination and what is BIM. And the three pillars that he had mentioned is people, processes, and technology. So you'll notice that I started with people. So with people, which is quite important, how you invest into your people. And for example, that you could be making out of BIM managers, BIM coordinators. Then after, it drives to the next, which is the process. Having to have governance for your projects or your organization, execution plan, information containers, responsibility matrix, etc., etc. And then thereafter, we have technology, which is kind of like the enabler. So think of it like this. Technology is like a car that you drive, but you need people. And people are the drivers. And then thereafter, you need the process, which is the roadmap. So if you have the car, no driver, or map, you are not really going anywhere. So on Sandgate, which is what we'll go through, we made sure that these three pillars kind of pull through. Then thereafter, talking about what level 2 is it. So let's be honest, with level 2, it's not the lowy BIM manager or BIM coordinator that is tucked away in a little corner trying to do the crash detection, etc., and not producing a BIM execution plan that is 60 pages that no one really reads. So it's not about the coordination as a theater where I find BIM coordination meetings where you pick up a clash and be like, okay, electrical engineer, you need to move your cable tray. Okay, that's fine. But it's not very much engaging. And with that, the level 2 is about more taking onus or action of the information. So it's not just your pretty 3D models. So the question is, how do we climb this? This is called the Monday morning vibes. And the question is, how do we start climbing the ladder? So essentially, you start small. So if you realize that, okay, you're on level 1, how do I get to level 0 or level 1? How do you get to level 2 or level 3? So you basically start small. To get to level 1, stop kind of emailing files and PDFs, etc., because it does get lost. Start using, like, for example, naming conventions of your files. Then after move to level 2, which is your common data environment. Now everybody's in the same shared environment. Typically, like for example, this room, we are all together in the same common data environment, in that sense. And then thereafter, we set the rules of the road. So for example, deciding where structural beams should stay put and where fight should move wasters. Then we dive into Sandgate as the benchmark. So at Sandgate, I think particularly enjoy this project. It's quite a complex project. We deal with retail, real estate development, and the easier it gets, where it gets further to the office towers. But, well, Sandgate, it's literally like, how do I say, the proof is in the pudding, or the pudding is in the proof. So this project is quite evident as it enforces the team huddle. So if you remember what I mentioned about the level 2. So this is how basically the approach works. We had 6 different disciplines, two common data environments, one from the developer and one from the design team. And it was just about drawing, it was more coordinated digital version of the real BIM. So if we're looking at the numbers, the complexity. So we're at a massive 22,000 square meter reality. When you look at these numbers, you look at retail, office towers, about 770 parking bays, and you kind of see the sheer volume of data. But the real reason the reason versus the benchmark is that it isn't just the size, it's the active developer who are not just allowed them, but almost demanding it. So when you have a client like that, that's a score, because now you are part of that 1%. We also had a contractor who was willing to digitalize their workflows, because we know, like, when you hit the site, yeah, sure, your three sets of drawings that needs to go to the site, but now we start to digitalize their workflows. And this is where Syndicates sits on the scorecard. So as you know, as mentioned, it's the solid level 2. We hit the mark on shared standards. The coordination, from information standards, how we coordinate it in 2 different common data environments. And then after heading to federation coordination. And lastly, which is the handover cycle, which is where asset data is captured. So we are nearly almost a bridge ahead of level 3. So now that I've spoken about the nice, let's talk about the shovel and the digital backbone. So the governance before modeling. So this is quite crucial. Having to understand what is the client's requirements. So we moved away from folder files or SharePoint files. We dived into the live common data environment, and then thereafter, with AppCon's requirements, they developed their protocol. So how information is going to be shared, how to upload information, etc., etc. And then with Workman, this is basically the workflow that you have 2 different hubs, one design coordination, and then after the developer who handles the construction. We then responded back with the BIM execution plan. And this is basically, as you guys know, with BIM execution plan, this just means it's basically a rule book on how the project is going to be delivered. We then responded to, okay, how we have 2 different hubs. Great, fantastic. 2 CDEs, but how do we share or exchange information? We then used the bridge toolset. So when information is pre-checked before it hits the client. And then thereafter, we use ACC, or rather Autodesk Forma, as part of the CEs. So on the consultant side, where all disciplines were added to, and then you had developer side, which was pretty much safe. So how did information move from through different gateways? So we kind of killed the inbox outbox workflow. So we moved information through different gateways, through the bridge automation. That's basically the crux of it. We then broke the complexity of the building, because it's quite complex. You have your mixed base build with 2 office towers. So again, there's enriched data. So having to break this up, we kind of, especially when it heads to our coordination as well. So we have the mixed use base build, which is more your office, retail, then after you 2 office towers, which is B2 and B3. Then my favorite slide, or my favorite part, is the right-of-way rules. Having to understand the hierarchy principles. So if you look at this little triangle, we base each service on a hierarchy system. And this enables to the clash matrix, which I'll get to briefly in a moment, where we have architecture and structure. So there we look at, for example, facade systems. How does that clash with beams and stuff like that? And then they're often tearing down to, has no structuring king, it doesn't move. And obviously, and there might be exceptions in certain areas, but it's going to be there. Then you have mechanical. uh, size matters, and as you know, big ducts. So that's quite difficult to move as opposed to cable tray. Headed down to gravity screen, which is wet surfaces, and then it tear it down to electrical, to fire, etc., etc. So with this system, we kind of save hours on trying to just coordinate everything. So is a method to the madness. So to look at this entering to the clash matrix. So okay, taking that hierarchy system and developing a clash matrix where we clash two different disciplines in that sense. So this is kind of like our visual matrix of how our coordination process. Then heading into the site coordination. So at the bottom, you will see the model coordination. This is the BIM model, how we coordinated versus what's happening on site. So you can see it isn't just about pretty 3D models. It's actual issues that were coordinated well before site. And that is basically the overall federation model in that sense as the digital backbone. So great, now that we found our federation strategy, there's so much data with clashes. We then kind of took that data and kind of make it a pretty, develop these dashboards just so that whenever we have our coordination meetings, instead of going through 50 pages of clash data, we then put this into our Power BI reports and kind of give feedback to the consultants as to say, okay, this discipline has this many clashes, and kind of keep a sense of accountability. And it also helps in the sense that where we base our volume strategy, seeing where's the most clashes in that sense. So with that federated model strategy and the BIM coordination, we then developed, this was then exchanged to the client, which is the developer. So you can see on, that is basically the federated model. That translated or bridged over to the client, so you can see the client is actually engaging the BIM model. That's how basically our BIM coordination meetings, and with that the client got to design views on the model. So no longer are exchanging PDFs, looking at config, so you can actually engage into the space. And in one of our success stories on Modena's website, I remember Jacques saying that we found that including key professionals, especially architects, who drive the early stages of design, this has made the process far more efficient. The ability to walk through BIM models digitally and conduct digital reviews has been invaluable. So that is the value that it adds to the process. So I'd like to kind of end this digital backbone in terms of this little quote by Philip G. Bernstein, where he mentions that BIM is the transition from representing the building to representing the knowledge of the building. So what does that mean? That's exactly what Sand Gate is. It's more than just a three representation of bricks and glazing. It's a database of knowledge, and the developer will use to run pieces in that sense. So great, now that you've learned about the process, the backend, now we're looking at the life cycle. One model, 5 lifetimes. So that relates to how the BIM maturity forms in the sets. So a drawing goes through the design process with your modeling, and the drawing usually serves as one purpose. It's the way to communicate and obviously to build. Once the building is kind of complete, the drawing kind of becomes stuck in that sense. The model kind of serves as a full lifetime cycle of the project. So from design, you're looking at the coordination, visualization, from docs, how that information exchange, to the procurement, to construction, and then operation. So with that, what does that actually mean? So we had to define the LODs, the reliability of the model. So looking at from concept to LOD 100 to LOD 500. So at this instance with Sanitary, for example, was sitting at LOD 300, which was indicates that this dimension correct, and we can fold off. And in a sense, that if we were to define the information exchange from Kobe asset data, and I mean, I remember with the developers mentioning about, we had a discussion around the asset register and so forth. So in simple terms, level 2 gives us the coordination, but the life cycle data gives us the building's future. So what does level 3 actually look like? So great, you are sitting on level 2, and that's the coordinated model, and we've got the coordination process, you have federated models, etc., etc. Then we're looking at the level 3, which is the digital twin, what builds onto it. So with that, you have basically, I call it your digital birth certificates of each element of the building in that sense. So, so on the left you see there, where we achieved with Sandiger level 2, they built the foundation of basically to level 3. So on the right here, you see with digital, the exchange value of the digital twin is where we use typical software, for example, like Autodesk Tableau, which I'll show you a little video in the next slide. Just show you basically how facility managers can use the model in that sense when information is input into the models. So what we've actually delivered. So the bottom line is that where you have governance in place, where coordination is in place, this is basically what it looks like in practice. So the team just didn't do BIM. The team actually delivered a measurable result for the developer. So looking at the zero ambiguity, where we eliminated which current drawing. The CDE was kind of like the final word in that sense. We reduced almost plus 5,000 clashes that is reviewed before it hits the site. So thus we saw it as kind of like a digital eraser before it actually hits the site. And in just-in-time coordination, looking at how we locked our models 2 weeks before, prior to construction. So we take the contractor's program and see how that fits in our coordination program, held well before the next task or happens. And then lastly, automated sync and audit. These we have the good audit trail of the data, leading us with the 100% defensible audit trail in that sense. So I'd like you to say, if you take these 3 things on, so to basically summarize all of this, is that first for me to kind of understand your workflows, where your organization sits are based on the maturity. Second, pick the right project to grow. So you don't have to use all projects, use one specific project, and treat your data as a deliverable. So the model is just as important as the physical building because it holds such rich information for the owner to run for the next phase or the next few years. And that wraps up mine.